I'm just gonna wildly assume anyone who's clicked on this video is familiar with the many incarnations of Link, Zelda and Ganon, but another figure linked to their cycle has often gone a bit under the radar. I'm talking about Impa, of course, the enigmatic figure who, despite not being an essential part of what Demise calls a curse, is still intrinsically linked with the repeated story of the Legend of Zelda. Sure, she may not appear in every game, but Ganon doesn't either, so that shouldn't be stopping us from giving her the credit she deserves. And today, I want to do just that, as I take you on a journey past the many incarnations of Impa we've seen over the years. Like many recurring elements of the Zelda series, Impa 2 debuted in The Legend of Zelda on NES. Its manual. Yeah, this is honestly kind of crazy to think about, but even though Impa has existed since the original game, players who have never opened the manual or replayed the game digitally years later may have never known this. Now, one of the first things the game tells you is to check out the manual, so it's not like it didn't try, but yeah, Impa does not appear in the actual game whatsoever, despite playing a relatively big role in the plot. As the manual explains, she is Zelda's nursemaid and takes on the appearance of an old woman, both elements of the character that frequently reappear. After Ganon's forces attack, Zelda sends Impa on a quest to find the hero who could save them. This information soon reaches Ganon, who sends his henchmen after her. She manages to evade capture for a while, but is eventually apprehended, and just as things are looking especially dire, a young boy comes across the scene and saves her. Impa immediately knows this is the hero she's looking for, and tells the young man Link everything there is to know, including hints on where to go during his adventure. That is the point where The Legend of Zelda NES kicks off, and no one who has played this classic on, say, Nintendo Switch Online would even know. A very similar situation was to be found a few years later in Zelda 2. Again, Impa sets up the story, but most of this is confined to the manual. This time around though, she at least gets a mention in the game, which I guess is something, although her contributions are downplayed. Since Zelda being asleep is this game's whole thing, Link goes to Impa when a weird symbol appears on his hand. She tells him really the whole story of the game, about Zelda's father, the missing Triforce piece, and the sleeping princess herself. Impa also gives him the 6 crystals that must be placed on the statues throughout Hyrule, meaning she arguably plays an even bigger role than in the previous game, despite not actually showing her face. We do again get a look at her design through the supplementary material though. Considering this game is a direct sequel to the original game, it shouldn't be a surprise she appears in more or less the same fashion. Yeah, she grew her hair out and got a new color robe, but that's about it. As we all know, the next game in the series would be a vital one in the portrayal of Impa for years to come, showing for the first time she had actual special abilities beyond just being Zelda's closest servant. What other game could I be talking about than the Wand of Gamelon, in which Impa makes another appearance accompanying Zelda. More importantly, however, in this game she is capable of using the Triforce of Wisdom to see the future. While Impa would never be able to use the power of the Triforce in the actual canon games, seeing and predicting the future is definitely much closer to a later skill set. Funnily enough, this is entirely a Philips created ability for her, as Nintendo hadn't gone further than making her a woman with deep knowledge on all things Hyrule. Why do you think I named my channel after her? But Nintendo was also about to change that, as the release of Ocarina of Time marked a huge shift in the portrayal of Impa. Even though she is still Zelda's attendant, she has had a complete makeover, is significantly younger and tougher here, as well as a member of the Sheikah for the very first time. This is also the first game where Impa is mentioned to be a part of the repeating cycle, as she literally says her kind has served the royalty of Hyrule for generations. Her role in the game originally resembles the 2 prior titles, as she helps Link get started with his adventure by teaching him Zelda's lullaby and pointing him towards Death Mountain. But when Ganondorf attacks, she flees with Zelda and remains in hiding for years, teaching her the ways of the Sheikah in the meantime. Impa is also considered to be the leader of Kakariko Village, which was just a normal town in A Link to the Past, but is the home of the Sheikah in this game. It's also there that Link eventually awakens the Sage of Shadow, revealed to be Impa, after defeating Bongo Bongo. Point being, this is a massive glow up for the character, going from an old lady that delivers a basic story setup to one of Ocarina of Time's most important characters. But despite this being easily the most recognizable and iconic incarnation of Impa so far, it would be a long while before she would appear in the same fashion again. Because since Majora's Mask doesn't really have Zelda in it, Impa also doesn't make an appearance. The next game to introduce us to a new Impa are the Oracle titles, although they go for an entirely new design once again. This version of Impa is neither old nor a Sheikah warrior, but instead once again Zelda's nursemaid. She is no slouch, however, being the person entrusted with guiding Din and Nehru to safety in Hyrule. She isn't successful, however, with the reasons differing between games. In Oracle of Seasons, General Onak's forces overpower her, while in Aegis she becomes temporarily possessed by the evil sorceress Varen. Both attacks leave her unable to continue her mission, forcing Link to take up the mantle. It leads to a role for her that is definitely reminiscent of the original two titles, but Capcom definitely injected some of Ocarina of Time's version of the character into it too. You would say that makes her a combination that could see Impa playing a role for years to come, but that is far from the truth. Following the two Oracle games, Impa would be absent from Zelda games for 10 entire years. And this was before the development cycles of the modern day, back when Zelda released yearly. However, there were still some allusions to Impa within those 10 titles, some bigger than others. The Wind Waker features Ocarina of Time's sages as stained glass portraits in Hyrule Castle, Impa included. And Twilight Princess features a character known as Impas, another elderly Sheikah woman who may not be Zelda's attendant or really a significant character at all, but it's at least a sign she wasn't completely forgotten. What should also definitely be mentioned here is that concept art for the game reveals this character was originally supposed to be an elderly man, known as Old Man Impa, which would have been the first and so far only male incarnation of Impa. That said, he doesn't really look remotely like other Impas we've seen, so maybe calling him an incarnation is a bridge too far. But what his exact role would have been, we will probably never know. In the next big 3D Zelda game, Impa finally made her reappearance, and not in a small fashion either. Maybe they couldn't choose between an older and younger design and figured why not both, because Skyward Sword has both an old and young Impa, although neither are Zelda's nursemaid. Instead, they are full-on servants of the goddess Hylia in this game, although I guess that makes them servants of Zelda as well, since Hylia lives within this Zelda, but let's keep things simple. Anyway, of course Skyward Sword puts a lot of focus on the reincarnation story of the series, and as such, cements Impa's place within that as well, strengthening the role Ocarina of Time alluded to. Although her being a Sheikah doesn't really play a very pronounced role in this game, she does have the symbol of her kind tattooed on her forehead, which would also become a character staple. Throughout the game, young Impa guides Zelda through fulfilling her destiny, while old Impa helps Link fulfill his and save the world. And while I'm typing this, I now realize that saying this game has both old and young Impas is technically a spoiler. Although I guess anyone who has ever played a Zelda game before will probably pick up on it immediately, but still. I remember playing this game for the first time and not realizing until the last few cutscenes that the older Impa had indeed not been called Impa throughout the game, but just Old Woman instead. I just considered her to be Impa the entire time. Anyway, another element that must be brought up with Impa in this game is the relationship she builds up with Groose throughout the story. While they originally have a rough start, they quickly begin to understand each other's roles within the larger plot unfolding, and Groose even starts calling her Granny as a nickname. It's very nice character development for him and some much needed character showing for her. Following Skyward Sword, Impa was completely back in vogue. She was now making appearances left and right, the next coming only 2 years later in A Link Between Worlds. And that is actually pretty telling of her status, since this game is a spiritual successor to A Link to the Past, in which Impa didn't appear. Regardless, this incarnation takes a lot from the depiction that was common at the time. She is again an old woman, and again Zelda's nursemaid, but also a descendant of one of the 7 sages. This makes her a target for Yuga, who turns her into a painting just like the other sages. That kinda embodies the role Impa plays throughout the rest of the game, one that is less Sheikah loyal to Zelda and more one of the 7 sages. It's a way Impa hasn't been used often before or since, but at least it's enough to make her reappear frequently throughout the game. With 10 years of absence still fresh in the memory, I guess we'll take that. Absent or not, Impa was still more than relevant enough to make a playable appearance in Hyrule Warriors. This is the first game since Ocarina of Time where only a young version of the character exists, with a design that, if you ask me, is her best of all time. She is not only Zelda's steward and bodyguard in the story of this game, but also commanding officer of the Hyrule Imperial Guard. A powerful title for a powerful incarnation. While this game isn't considered canon, the usual Zelda development team, Aonuma included, oversaw the creation of Hyrule Warriors, so we can definitely say they greenlit her design, but also her abilities, which include some never before seen ones, such as the manipulation of water and fire using her blade. Even though it isn't the next game released in the series, I want to look at the other Warriors game, Age of Calamity, next. And there's a very simple reason for that. It precedes Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom by around 100 years. And that means that whereas those mainline titles feature an elderly Impa, in Age of Calamity she's around 20 years old. Her younger design this time around looks nothing like the young Impas we've seen before, however, resembling her granddaughter Paya or sister Purah much more. She is also not Zelda's bodyguard or steward here, but instead a close friend and advisor, which does suit this design a lot better. She is one of the first playable characters of the game, using moves we haven't seen before, like cloning herself. Throughout the events that precede Breath of the Wild, Impa has more of a supporting role, being present for many significant events, but not directly contributing to them either. Compared to previous versions, she definitely feels more on equal footing with Link and Zelda than ever before, instead of being this wise, enigmatic figure we've seen in past games. 100 years later, Impa is an elderly woman, residing in Kakariko village, where she serves as their leader. Funnily enough, her older sister Purah now looks like a literal child, despite actually being older, although Impa hasn't seen her since the events of Age of Calamity. Impa's role in this title definitely comes closer to what we've seen before, serving as a wise guide to a clueless Link, who doesn't remember his former friend whatsoever. She also has shades of Nintendo's original concept of the character, an elderly woman with a grand knowledge of everything Hyrule. She tells Link about the events of 10,000 years ago, the divine beasts, the importance of the Sheikah Slate and the location of great fairies. Unlike many other titles, she is also far from alone in this game. She lives with her granddaughter Paya and has two guards often around her named Dorian and Kato. The latter would soon travel all across Hyrule with her after Paya takes on the mantle of village elder. She is investigating the geoglyphs that appeared following the upheaval, which coincided with the disappearance of Zelda. When Link examines these, he comes across tears that contain memories, which has become a core theme of Impa in these two games. Both from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, she is a source of long-lost memories for Link, both directly through recalling the legends of the past, as well as indirectly through setting up quest lines with the memories and tears. However, her direct impact in the story of these two games is fairly minor, even as far as elderly Impas go. And while that is the last mainline game released so far, Impa would also make a playable appearance in Cadence of Hyrule. There's not a whole lot to say about her role here beyond the fact she uses her most recognizable weapon, a Naginata. In an effort to future-proof this video, I also want to briefly mention what we know at the point of writing about Impa's appearance in Echoes of Wisdom. She is again an elderly lady, albeit with a design that looks somewhat kinder than what we've seen in the past. Despite her old age though, she is definitely still highly capable, as the trailer shows her moving at lightning fast speeds. Since this game revolves entirely around Zelda, I think it's fair to say she'll definitely have a bit of a guiding role in this game, potentially even being a pretty significant side character. Also worth mentioning is that Echoes of Wisdom again gives her a larger family, consisting this time of brother Rubery. It's definitely a role that is reminiscent of what we've seen in the two open world games, and since those titles have become the new standard of the Zelda series for a huge amount of people, I'm willing to bet we won't see Impa disappear for 10 years again. And that's every Impa ever. What's your favorite incarnation? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Zelda content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.